Okay guys, in this tutorial we are going to be looking at getting your own cracking Easter egg using the Voronoi fracture in R18. So let's get cracking. So the first thing to do in Cinema 4D is to create ourselves the egg. And the easiest way I find to do that is going to be using a spline. Okay, so I'm just going to go to my side view, or front view in fact. Okay, and I'm going to use the pen tool to create myself a spline. Okay, that's going to be the outline of our egg. I'm going to use a lathe NURBS in order to give us that sweeping shape all the way around. Okay, so I'm just going to get the points there. Okay, and then I'm just going to check that they're all at 0. Okay, because if they're not, then the lathe NURBS will not perform properly. So there's my spline. Okay, may just make some adjustments. Okay, and of course, you know, feel free to edit and adjust stuff as you go, depending on how you feel and how you want your egg to look. So I'm going to create my lathe NURBS and drag and drop my spline in. Okay, just F1 to look in 3D. I'm just going to see what I think of that shape. Not really happy with it, so that's why I was waiting till I could see it in 3D, and then I can adjust that sort of shape to give me something that reflects a little bit more what I am after. Okay, so it's entirely up to you obviously whether or not you want your egg to be short and fat, or whether or not it's going to be, you know, more realistic. There we go, I'm quite happy with that. So F1, there we go, there is my egg. Okay, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to create myself a copy. So I'm just going to right click on the lathe NURBS and current state to object, and then I'm going to hide my original. Okay, that just gives me an egg here, okay, that's got all of the shape that I want, but it leaves me the original if I ever need to go back to it. Okay, so now my egg is going to be hollow, so if I'm just going to select all of those, at the moment all of the polygons are facing the other way. Okay, which for me at this point in time is absolutely fine, because this is going to form the inside of the egg, and I'm going to want to make sure that the inside, the polygons face the correct way. Okay, the way you can tell if a polygon is facing the correct way is because if it's correct, it's orange, whereas this one it's blue. So if I just right click and reverse the normals, you can see that now they're all orange, so the polygons are facing me, means the normals are facing me. Okay, and if I reverse again, they're facing the wrong way. So with those, okay, I'm just going to create another copy. Okay, just Command C, Command V, get myself a second one, and this I'm going to scale up ever so slightly, and that's going to give me the outside. So if I just go to my side view really quickly, you can see that I now have two, and I've got a very thin shell around the outside, okay, or in between the two. So what I now need to do, not deselect, right click and reverse normals, and now I have one set of polygons that are facing the correct way for me, and one that are inside out, which will work together to give me the shell. Now I need to put the two together. Okay, and to do that, I'm going to use a bool. Or I suppose I could just connect and delete. And there are a couple of different ways of doing it. Okay, so if I select the two, and right click and connect objects and delete, okay, I now have a single object that gives me everything I need. No need to use the bool. Okay, so this gives me my egg. Marvellous. Okay, that gives me the shape that I want. Now what I'm going to do is we need to start cracking it. So up here in the MoGraph is the Voronoi fracture tool. Okay, it's a nice new addition to R18, and I'm going to put the lathe NURBS into it. Now you can see that what it does is it colorizes those fragments and says these are the individual elements that it is going to shatter. Okay, and it does that via the sources tab here. We've got our point generator, and if I look at it, you can see that I can increase the amount, and that changes the amount of fragments that it would go into. Okay, but I'm going to want to have more control over its cracking. So this point generator, I'm going to replace with my own. So I'm going to delete that. And now you can see that I just have a whole egg. Okay, that is one fragment. It will not shatter. It will not do anything anywhere useful at this point. So I'm going to create myself a plane because that is what I'm going to want it to crack along. So I'm just going to change the orientation of that plane. Okay, ooh, wrong one. Okay, there we go. And if I move that up there, and I'm going to turn on the ground shading lines so that you can see that this is made up of 20 by 20. Okay, now under the Voronoi fracture we've got its sources, and I simply drag and drop that plane into the source, and you can see that it now divides this into all of the different squares that would be its fractures along its lines, which is great if you were making chips, but at this point I'm not. I only want it to have sort of a middle control. So at the moment, if you notice, if I get rid of 10 by 10, you can see that the number of fractures changes as well. And what I really want, however, is 1 by 1. Okay. And then I'm going to move it across there. I am going to increase its height segments by 2 because I want this middle section here. Now its height I'm going to adapt, and you can see that that changes how this slices. Okay, and that gives me some nice control over the middle where I want that crack. And if you move the thing up and down, you can do it that way, whereas I want this sort of middle here, and I only want a little bit to show. Okay, and that allows me to limit where my next phase is going to go. Okay, and to do that I need another Voronoi fracture. So if I just go to MoGraph, create another Voronoi fracture, and I drag and drop the Voronoi fracture inside, you can see that it still has its original slices, but then the second Voronoi, or Voronoi fracture 1, has resegmented those different parts. But I don't want it at the moment to segment the parts at the bottom or the top. I only want it to work along the crack in the middle, as it were. So I need to limit where it does that too. And if I go to my Objects tab, we have a MoGraph Selection. This allows me to select a section of the Voronoi fracture and tell it to limit its fracturing to that particular part. So with the original Voronoi fracture selected, okay, and then I go to MoGraph and I go to MoGraph Selection, you can see that, very faintly, that there are sections here that show where those sort of original sections are of the Voronoi fracture 1. If I just turn off fracture 1, sorry, the first fracture, you can see that I've got those points. So if I select that, it instantly creates me this MoGraph Selection tag. Okay, and it's just got clear and invert and MoGraph Selection. I'm just going to call that middle. It's always good to name stuff as you go, otherwise it gets very confusing down the line and you don't know what it is that you are trying to select anymore. So now if I go to this Voronoi fracture 1 and I put a tick back in the box, you can see that it fractures everything. But if I now drag that selection tag into my MoGraph Selection part, you can see that it now only fractures that middle part. Okay, and that limits what it is that it is going to fracture. So what I can do with this Voronoi fracture, using its sources of point distribution, okay, I can sort of change where those points are. So using the transform tools, if you notice, if I change the scale, you can see that I start to get cracks along that sort of point, and it squidges all of the fracture points down the middle. And it means that I can start to get cracks along the center that I like the look of, that would give me that fracture look, as though the egg is cracking along the middle. Okay, and you've got some control, so you're going to want to adjust your settings. Okay, I like something like that because it gives me, it gives me a nice path along the center. That's kind of what I'm going for. So this sort of crack along the middle, that will mimic, whereas well, like an egg is cracking through the center. Okay, and just to kind of have a see what that's going to look like, I'm going to use the Voronoi fracture and I'm going to go to the object and I'm going to just increase its offset. Okay, and you can see that it starts to create those fragments. Okay, but what it is doing is it's creating fragments all the way through the object, which is not what I want to do. This is a hollow object, so I need to put a tick in the box that says hollow object. Now if I look at the offset, okay, I think I need to do it to both. Okay, there we go. You can see that it's using the thickness that I've created using my inside and my outside shells that I created, and it gives me that nice egg feeling as opposed to being a massive solid object. Okay, so there we go, shrink that back and we're ready to start creating the cracks of our egg. Okay, this plane I've got, I'm just going to hide it from render, hide it from view, so that we don't have anything in the way. Okay, now I need to start cracking this egg, and to do that I'm going to use this offset fracture. Okay, so I'm going to start keyframing. So at the very beginning, okay, saying about 10 frames in, I want to make sure that I've got 10 frames of it not doing anything, maybe 20. So I'm going to put a keyframe in here by just clicking the animation frame there, and that means that it's keyframed at 0. Okay, I'm going to need to give myself a lot more time on the timeline, so say about 250. Okay, that means that for 10 frames, okay, it's not going to do anything. Then at 30 frames, okay, I want to crack it just a little bit. Okay, and that gives me that little tiny sort of movement, and I'm going to keyframe it there again. Okay, now if I go from beginning to end, you can say that crack grows. Okay, but it doesn't give me that sudden impact. Okay, I'm going to get to that in a minute. So I'm just going to keep keyframing every sort of 20 frames to go up by another point. Okay, and keyframe, and 70, and 90, and finally at 110 it's going to be a full centimetre crack. Okay, now why bother doing that? Because all that does is gradually move it across in that nice smooth sense. Okay, but that's where the next part comes into play. So with those keyframes, okay, if I bring up my timeline in dope sheet mode, Cinema 4D's natural interpolation, that's how it gets between each keyframe, is a nice smooth ease in and ease out. So it starts slowly and then it slows down. Okay, and you can do linear, and then that will be a continual speed right from beginning to end. However, the one I want is going to be step. Now what step does, okay, with all my keyframes selected, I have chosen the step interpolation. If I go back from the beginning, you can see that it then gets to 30, cracks a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Okay, and that's doing that every 10 frames. Okay, it's very, methodical, but it gives that real sense that the egg is cracking, and which is exactly what I'm after. But it doesn't crack very far. Okay, this is where the plane comes back into play. So we know that the Voronoi fracture is keyframed at 30, 50, 70, 90, and 110. Okay, so equally, I'm going to do something with my plane. So at frame 10, I want to make sure that its height is keyframed at 138. Okay, and then I'm going to go to 130. Okay, and I'm still happy with that. Actually, I don't want it to crack any more than the center than it does here. So I'm going to make sure that's continually keyframed there at 138. Could have just moved the keyframe along, but hey ho. Then here at 50, where it cracks a little bit wider, I want to increase the plane's height because that will increase the cracks further. Keyframe again. 70, where it gets further still. Okay, I'm going to crack a little bit more by increasing the height. Keyframe. 90, further still. Keyframe, and finally 110, when it's really wide, I'm going to increase its height so that it looks like it's cracked all the way up and all the way down. Okay, keyframe that, go back to the beginning. Okay, you can see that that changes all the way up. Now, same as before, that doesn't give that crack impact that I want to be going on. So, same thing as I did with the offset. I'm just going to go to my timeline, go to my dope sheet, to make sure that the plane keyframes are selected, and I'm going to go to step interpolation there. I'll go back to the beginning, okay, and you can see that it cracks all the way up, and that gives me that nice sort of real sense that this egg is cracking open. Okay, I'm just going to go to the Voronoi fractures, select both of them, and then I'm going to deselect colorized fragments so that we haven't got this different colored fragments. And I'm just going to turn off the lines so that we've only got the fragment, the egg itself. And you can see that we now start to get this nice egg cracking all the way across. Okay, and one of the things that I find makes this movement a little bit more realistic is to animate the egg wobbling. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to need to group the objects. If I don't, and I animate this Voronoi fracture, okay, if I just move its center point down towards the bottom of the egg, it's just worrying where I'm doing that. That's why it's jittering. Okay, if I just go to the object mode and I animate that, okay, sometimes the center goes a little bit crazy. Okay, so for me, actually, in this instance, it's not, which is quite nice. If you animate the Voronoi rather than animate the lathe, if I animate the lathe, how that plane has an effect, okay, can go a little bit crazy. So you want to make sure that you either group everything, like all of that together, or animate the Voronoi, animate the parent, and you will be able to make sure that that crack doesn't change as it goes. Okay, so in order to add this nice little bit of wobble, I'm just going to increase my ability of viewing the frames themselves, okay, because we're going to be working with individual frames. So the first crack we see is at 30, so I want it to be back there at 30. Okay, so about 5 frames before, okay, I want it to be just a little bit wonky. Okay, so maybe -5 actually, and then I'm going to, in its coordinates manager here, okay, I'm going to keyframe that. At 30, I want it to be back at 0, okay, and only 5 frames before that, so at 20, I want it to still be at 0. Okay, so it stays still, and then it wobbles, and then comes back. Now, that's not too bad, okay? But the one thing within animation that you need to get realistic movement, okay, is starting to use things called the principles of animation. And one of those, okay, is anticipation. And the other is what they call sort of follow through and overlapping action. And even though it's going to go that way, okay, a couple of frames before, I'm going to want it to just go the other way a smidge, about 1 degree, okay, and before then it will have been at 0, okay, and what that does, that just gives a little tiny shake, okay, in the right direction. So it just moves backwards to give you that more realistic sense, and then as it goes back, okay, it gets to there. Now, same fashion, 2 frames after, I want it to go in that direction, like it's overshot by about 1 degree, and then at 34, it will be back at 0. And that just gives that nice realistic wobble, okay, that gives that sense that this egg is really wobbling, okay, that something is in there trying to get out. Now I'm going to do that, okay, for each of my little sort of wobbles here, okay. Okay, so at 50, okay, because that's where it cracks, okay, but this time, okay, so this, in that one it went this way, 5 frames before, I want it to go that way by 5 degrees, okay, so 5 frames before that, it will have been happily at 0, okay, 2 frames after, ooh, I forgot to keyframe that. Now I've done it on the wrong frame, just drag and drop to overwrite. Okay, so there we go, that's at 0, then that's at 45, 5, and then that's at 0. Okay, 2 frames before, -1, keyframe, and there we'll be back at 0. Okay, 2 frames after, okay, just -1 so that it's overshot, and then at 54 back at 0 and keyframe. And now if I look from the beginning, okay, it does that nice wobble. Now I need to do that a few more times, and the easiest way to do that is to just copy and paste the frames that I already have. Okay, so if I select all of those, okay, that gives me this first wobble from backwards one way, and then the wobble back the other. Now if I just control drag, I can put those, do a nice copy, okay, so that I now have wobbles one way, wobbles the other, wobbles one way, wobbles the other, final crack. Okay, you can choose to have it wobble one more time. Maybe I'm just going to leave it still so that it just sits there and crack. Okay, which is quite like. Okay, just play that. It's a very active egg there. What you can do, if you want, you can space them out. So I'm just going to select all of my objects that have animations, that have got keyframes here. Okay, and perhaps between the last one and there, I can select, ooh, missed one. Okay, zooming in would help, wouldn't it? So if I select everything from 110 to the 2 before 60, yeah, so I know that that is where it's still. So it's just wobbled from that. Maybe if I elongate that, say 10 frames, Okay, because I've got the Voronois and the plane selected, I'm able to access all of those keyframes in this little timeline preview. So it wobbles, wobbles back, wobbles, wobbles back. Okay, there's a little bit of a shake there. I must have missed a keyframe. So I shall just select that keyframe there and I shall move it there. So now that it stays still again between 54 and 65. Wobbles, wobbles back, wobbles, wobbles back. Cracks. Cool. Okay, and that gives me a really nice feel to this egg cracking. Okay, so now in my animation I have a nice little Easter message waiting and ready to pop out. Okay, and that I'm just going to use some Mo text for. So go up to MoGraph and then I'm going to create some Mo text. Whoa, it's a bit large. So I'm going to just go to my Mo text. I'm going to go to my object. I'm going to go, for this one, I'm just going to call it Happy Easter. You've seen what you can write before, and I'm just going to make that center aligned so that I know it's going to be where I want it, put it in the middle. The font's entirely up to you. You know, there's a vast array of fonts for this tutorial. Let's have a nose and see what we've got, if we've got anything really exciting. Something that makes it look fun. I don't know. Like I say, it's really entirely up to you. The one I used for the demo was just a sort of handwritten script one. Maybe we can stick some handwriting in there. Nice little Christmas. Nice little Easter message. So I'm just going to shrink that down. Okay. And I'm going to put it in the middle so that you can kind of see that there's something in there. Now, what I'm going to want it to do is I'm going to want it to burst out and shatter the egg. And to do that, I'm going to use some simulations. Okay, I'm going to use some dynamic stuff. So the Voronoi fracture, okay, I'm going to want to add a tag to. And that simulation tag, okay, is going to be rigid body. I want these individual fragments to be part of a hard object. So that's where you use the rigid body. So if I select the rigid body, okay, and if I press play straight away, the egg plummets, which is not what I want to happen whatsoever. So under the dynamics, I need to trigger, rather than immediately, I need to trigger on collision. Okay, and now if I go back to the beginning and press play, okay, it wiggles, but falls apart. Okay, and it falls apart for a very simple reason. Okay, it's on collision, but the egg is moving and changing size, and the bits individually clip, and they collide with each other, which means it falls apart. So if I go to collisions and untick self collisions and then go back to the beginning and play, the egg wobbles happily the way I wanted it to without falling apart. Okay, and that's really important. Otherwise the egg will just keep randomly exploding. Now I need to go to the Mo text and I need to tell it that it is going to collide with things, and to do that I create a collider body. Okay, now at the moment if I press play, okay, it shatters all the way from the beginning because of the way it's moving. The egg is there, okay, and as the egg moves there is a Happy Easter sign getting in the way, okay, that is causing some issues with the egg itself. So if I go back to the beginning, I want the dynamics of this to be off whilst the egg is moving. Okay, so I'm going to untick and then I'm going to keyframe that. Now if I go to the beginning again, the egg continues happily. Okay, So once I'm happy that that egg has finished, which I know is about, ooh, where is it now? About 116. So say if I wanted 150 my egg to start exploding, okay, so it finished cracking there, say 150, I want the dynamics of this to come back on. So tick in the box and keyframe, and now if I go back to the beginning, okay, egg still wobbles, no problems whatsoever, and then at 150, nothing happens yet. Because the egg is sitting in where it is, still. The MoText is sitting in the middle and is not doing anything. If I just go back to the beginning play and then move the MoText, I can smash the egg left, right, and centre, okay? But only when the dynamics is enabled. So if I just undo that to make sure that my MoText is back from the beginning. But what I want to do, to give a real nice sort of punchy effect, I want to have that punch through and shatter the egg. So to do that, I need to animate the MoText doing a couple of things, okay, which is changing up in size and probably moving forward, okay. So MoText coordinates, okay, and then I'm just going to change it to object mode, and then I'm just going to keyframe, okay, at 150, it's there. Then at 160, okay, I want it to be much bigger, okay, I want it to be in the middle, and I think I'm going to want it to come forward, so just grabbing that blue handle, okay, that means it's going to come through the parts, okay, and I'm going to click keyframe, I'm just going to scrub through, you can see that it starts, it's going to pop out there really quite nicely. So if I go back to the beginning and press play, wibbles, 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 kaboom! Okay, and it pops itself out of the egg. Now, it doesn't get rid of the back, and the reason for that is the placement of the egg, of the Happy Easter within the egg. Like you can see, it's smack bang in the middle. So you can change its starting position if you wanted to. You could grab the, ooh, not that one, grab the blue handle, okay, and you can move it maybe behind the egg so that you can't see it, so that when it comes through, wibble, wibble, and then it will smash its way through the egg, okay. It depends whether or not that looks like it's coming in the egg or out the egg. I mean, I think it would be a nice little fake. Kaboom, kaboom, and smash. There we go. I noticed that it's leaving the top and the bottom of the egg looking, you know, exactly where it is. And that's because we turned the self-collisions off. Okay, as this punches its way through, it will send those fragments smashing, but because they're smashing into each other, I've turned self-collisions off, it won't do it. So what I want to do at some point is turn self-collisions back on. So our MoText moves at 150, okay, so I want it back on then. So if I just go to here, go to collisions, turn self-collisions on, put a keyframe in it, okay, that means that at this frame it is definitely on. But being the only keyframe there is, it means that it's going to stay on and have been on before now. So if I just go one frame back, okay, pressing F on the keyboard is a nice little keyframe, is a nice little shortcut, sorry. Untick and put a keyframe. There is no self-collisions at the beginning of the animation, and then there is self-collisions, okay, halfway through. So now, back to the beginning and press play. Wiggle, 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 wiggle. Kaboom! Okay, and that sends our little fragments flying, okay. That animation I am really happy with, okay, that does exactly what I want it to. Next, we need to texture it, okay. So I've got a nice sort of painted egg effect on the one that I've done before, and to do that, create a new material, load it up, okay, and under our layers here, textures here, I want a gradient. Now that gradient is black to white, okay. And if I click in there, you can see that you can change the direction. So I want it V because I want it up and down. Now it starts black and ends white, but I want a lot more colours than that. So let's, oh, hello. That wasn't what I was after at all. Wow, that's full screen that as well. That's interesting. So I'm going to use this to pick the colours that I want. Okay, so perhaps I will choose a nice sort of pastel blue. Okay. I think that's a side effect of my full screen mode. That's really interesting. Okay, and I want it to end there as well. So I'm going to create a blue all the way across. Oh, and overwrite the white. Just click and drag that out the way. Okay, and now that means that if I click there and click there, all of that's definitely going to be blue. Now let's change that colour again. Whee, this is going to be interesting. Let's go for a nice sort of lightish green. Okay, and I'm going to drag that there. Now you can see that you've got this little fuzzy gradient. I'm just going to move that slightly closer so that the gradient's a little bit sharper. I want to kind of fake that this has been painted with a brush so that this is a painted egg. And then we can start getting those stripes. Okay. Choose another colour, for which I shall go for a nice sort of red. Okay, and same sort of thing. And then I'm going to drag that a couple more times so that I end up with this band, because in the middle I think I'm going to choose a nice pastel yellow. Okay. Okay, and that gives me this nice striped pattern here that I'm going to put on my egg. With regards to the reflectance, eggs aren't particularly shiny, so I'm going to make sure that my specular strength is quite low. But they do spread light quite a lot, so I'm going to just spread out that specular quite a bit. And to fake the surface of the egg being sort of that mottled effect that it has, I am going to use a layer mask here for the specular, and that is going to be some noise. And it just adds that little sort of mottled effect so that it isn't quite as plain all the way across. And I'm going to change that noise to maybe, FBM has a lot of interesting detail in it, so that's the one I'm going to use. Okay, and I've got the colour there. Okay, I'm just going to put that on. Okay, and it gives me its own sort of interpretation of how I wanted that to look. So using the projection, I'm going to change that to cylindrical, being the most, you know, sort of nearest to what it is that I want. Okay, and you've got the control of how it shapes that out. Okay, and you can change its offset. So if I wanted it so that I had the green all the way, or the blue, you know, like I've got here. So I've got the blue at the top and the bottom. I've got the nice yellow stripe in the middle, and then all the way across. Okay. So if I just render that and have a look, yeah, it's not too bad. Okay, you can start to see, at least I can, the sort of mottled effect here. But I'm going to add a little bit of bump, methinks. And again, I'm going to use a noise, and I'm going to use the same noise as I've used, so it matches the specular, and it's the FBM. If I just render that, there we go. Okay, you've got that sort of real mottled effect. Might be a bit too much, so I'm going to just lower its strength a little bit. But this parallax movement that's now in Cinema 4D is really nice, and it's got a really nice effect. If I increase that and then render, you can see that it adds this nice little ruffledness around the edges. It makes it look like it's been sort of painted. It's just the way that it's trying to fake the bump coming in and out, but it gives that nice effect. So I'm quite happy with that. I'm just going to increase my V length there and the offset down, because I don't want those green bits at the top. And if I have a quick render, there we go. Okay, that gives me my nice egg effect there. Now, One of the other things to do is to give myself some form of background. Okay, at the moment it's just that black that Cinema 4D creates, but I want a nice smooth background like I've done in my one. And to do that, it's very simple. I'm going to create like a photography backdrop, which is a curve, starts at the top and works its way down. And I am going to just, pick one of my side views. Okay, yeah, there we go. I want to make sure I'm using that. I don't want to create it in front of it. And I'm going to use the pen tool. Okay, and I'm going to start over here to give myself a nice floor, which I'm then going to curve. And you can see that that gives me this nice curvature. And I'm just going to go up a little bit further. Boom. Okay, and that's all we need. Because now I'm going to use an extrude NURBS, okay, to extrude that across. So, creating the extrude, drag and dropping the spline on the inside. Okay, we don't get much at the moment. It's shifting it in the wrong direction. Okay, so with the extrude, it's going to zero that out so it doesn't go that way. Ooh, and it's doing its automatic. And now, ooh, not the Y direction, the X axis. There we go. Okay, so if I go to my front, you can see that it's starting to create this nice backdrop, which I'll just need to move into position behind my egg. Okay, if I just zoom in, okay, and I'm just gonna go to my front view this time and make sure that that's over a little bit more. I don't want to see it in my camera. Okay, a little bit further. There we go. Okay, quite like the look of that. And to give a nice clean effect to that background, I'm just going to create a nice white background. I'm going to get rid of the reflectance. I'm going to give it some colour. Just going to make sure it's nice and white, and drag and drop that to there. Click render, and that gives me a much nicer, cleaner background. Oh, you can see that we've got the edges in there. Just going to move my camera around a bit. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to increase the length of that again. I'm going to move it across, definitely so I don't see it in my camera. Okay, here we go. Okay, now we need some lighting, and the easiest way of doing that is to create myself a physical sky. Now you can adjust the time of the physical sky to when you want it to see what light you want to get. Okay, and that gives me a shadow round about there. I want it nice and bright in the day. Okay, so I can choose now if I wanted, which is about 20 past 10, or if I just cycle it around to 12 o'clock so the sun is nice and high. But I want my shadow of my egg to be behind. So I can just get my physical sky, use the rotate tool, okay, and I can just shift it around. And you can see that the shadow changes quite quickly. You know, it updates in real time, which is nice. So about there, it's probably going to give me, here we go, the shadow at the bottom like I want. Now, what scene wouldn't be looking nicer without a couple of effects in the render? So going to my editor settings, okay, I'm going to go to my effects, I'm going to add ambient occlusion, and I'm going to add global illumination, okay, and then I'm going to press render. It might increase your render time, but it almost certainly looks a little bit more realistic. Okay, I'm quite pleased with that. So now if I click play, okay, now we've got my scene set up a little nicer, and I move it, okay, you can see that it works quite well. And then it explodes, okay. The big problem is that the texture, when the egg explodes, okay, isn't stuck to the fragments. The texture is projected in one way and the fragments then all go off, okay. As before in tutorials that I've done, we need to literally stick the texture, okay. So selecting that, going to my tags, okay, and go to stick texture, tag, and then record, okay. Now, if I scrub my way through, it rocks fine, and then as it explodes, it stays, okay, where it was. The stick texture tag doesn't work. The reason for this is because it is applied to the Voronoi fracture and not the lathe. Okay, that is what it needs to stick to, because that is what is being shattered. So I'm going to delete that tag, and I'm going to move my texture tag to the lathe. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to have a quick render, see how that looks. Okay, it's because it's gone a little bit crazy because I've moved it. So I'm going to delete that tag, and I'm going to apply it directly to that lathe. Okay, just going to deselect those so that they're not affecting it. And then I'm going to need to adjust my mapping again. Okay, we know that we can make it look good. So going to the cylindrical, okay, increasing the offset a little bit, increasing the length, and then back down. Okay, and then click render. Just make sure I'm happy with it. Yep, blue at the top, blue at the bottom, green, then that nice gradient between. And then to the lathe nubs, tags, stick texture, record. Okay, so now if I just turn my Voronoi fractures back on, oh, can you see there we've got this interesting texture error in the middle. Sometimes I find that happens when using complicated Voronoi fractures in the way that we have. So the way I find to reset that is just to sort of change the coordinates. So using its enable axis and clicking the Voronoi fracture, I'm just going to zero that out. And if you see, there you go, the egg jumps ever so slightly, but it resets that texture. And now if I scrub through, you can see that the animation remains the same. There's no texture error, and everything carries on as I expected. So now we need to add some form of texture to my Happy Easter sign. So just going to create a new material, go up here, color. I'm probably going to pick a similar bright color like I did in my example. Just going to change the specular, going to bring it down so it's got a nice sharp highlight, but make the brightness bigger so it's nice and shiny. And then I shall apply that to my Mo text. Okay, and now if I go back to the beginning, okay, just going to make sure everything is deselected and press play. And there we have it. Okay, just going to pause and render that. Okay, and there we go. We've got a nice, bright, Happy Easter sign there. Obviously, you can put whatever text or object you want coming out of the egg, make it like a Kinder Surprise. And I hope you enjoyed following along this tutorial, and I wish you a Happy Easter. Have a cracking time.